Welcome to StudioCF, the video law blog by the Carlton Fields Law Firm. My name is Joanna Garcia, and I'm a shareholder and business litigator at the firm. Joining me is Lori Baggett, who is a construction and employment litigator at the firm. The topic for this episode of StudioCF is preparing for and handling an OSHA inspection. Lori, let's start with a basic question. What is OSHA?
The Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970 is a federal law that was passed to make the workplace safer for employees, to protect them from serious injuries or even being killed. And that act actually created OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And that agency actually implements standards and regulations for the workplace, and then also is charged with investigating or inspecting workplaces to make sure that employers are following those regulations.
Are OSHA inspections scheduled in advance, or can the inspectors show up unannounced?
The typical situation involves an OSHA investigator showing up unannounced. Many times it's in response to an employee complaint about the safety situation at the work site, or to just a general initiative that OSHA may be focusing on at that point in time. So as a general practice, it's a good idea for employers to periodically check OSHA's website or just stay abreast of initiatives that OSHA is implementing. For instance, if they're focusing on the safety involved with employees being on cranes, and if your work site uses cranes a lot, that might be a good indication that you're subject to an investigation by OSHA.
Are there any general practices that an employer can implement to be prepared for an OSHA inspection?
Yes, there are a number of steps that an employer can take. On an ongoing basis, an employer should be familiar with the standards and regulations that apply specifically to that worksite facility. For example, if the facility handles toxic chemicals on a regular basis, you should always be up to date on the standards and regulations for disposal of those chemicals, protective gear that needs to be worn when employees are handling those chemicals. Also, if there are any violations that you have found with specific employees, you need to make sure that those are properly documented and that you've done any follow-up training with that particular employee, or if necessary with the entire company, to make sure that the employees are aware of the safety regulations. Also, if there have been any complaints from the employees to the company, you need to make sure that those have been investigated and that all of these have been properly documented and maintained in a safety notebook. And that's so that if there is an investigation that's unannounced, OSHA can look at your notebook and see that there are these situations that have arisen and that you've addressed them properly. Also, with respect to employee complaints or violations, it could serve as an affirmative defense later if the company is hit with a citation, because it would show that the company takes the safety violations seriously and then takes steps to remedy them down the line. And the final thing I would suggest is selecting a small group of key supervisors, say 2 to 3 supervisors, that might receive additional training in what steps to take when OSHA investigators show up. And that way you can educate them about not making offhand comments or informal statements that could be construed as an admission by the company. And you can just give them additional training so that they in particular know how to handle the situation when the inspectors are on site.
What should the employer do when an OSHA inspector shows up?
The first thing you should do when an inspector shows up is ask to see their credentials, to make sure that they are from OSHA, and to jot down their contact information for follow-up conversations. The next thing you should do is call Labor Counsel to advise them that the OSHA investigators are on site, and find out the topic of their inspection. What exactly are they looking for, and what's the purpose of their visit, and make sure you advise Labor Counsel of that. And in that instance, then Labor Counsel can let you know if there are additional steps that you should take, and if appropriate and if feasible, Labor Counsel can come to the site to be there to assist the employer with the investigation. Also, with respect to the small group of key supervisors we talked about, make sure that they are alerted and can then come and escort the inspectors around the work site. And that's a particular situation why we say to have 2 or 3, because in any situation someone might not be available. But if you have enough key supervisors, then everyone's available to assist the inspectors on site.
Can OSHA inspectors conduct employee interviews without counsel present?
With respect to the rank and file employees, Labor Counsel can be present in those interviews with the consent of the OSHA inspectors. But with respect to supervisors or managers, the employer has the right to have Labor Counsel present in those interviews, because statements that supervisors or managers make could potentially bind the employer and be an admission against the employer's interests.
Should the employees or the employer's inspection team monitor the OSHA inspectors during the walk-around?
Yes, it's certainly a good idea to monitor them during the walk-around. In many instances, the inspectors will take measurements or photographs or video footage, and it's advisable for the inspection team to do the same thing. And that will allow the employer to realize what was the focus of the inspector's investigation. What particular areas were they concerned about? Because many times it could be up to 6 months before the inspectors respond with citation or any sort of follow-up information. So by mirroring the inspectors and also taking your own photographs or video footage, you're able to consult with labor counsel and see what were the areas of focus, and if you can notice any potential violations, correct them yourself. Also, when you're conducting the walk-around, make sure that you have enough protective gear, whether that be hard hats or safety goggles, for any areas where the inspectors might visit, because you certainly don't want to have a technical violation at the time of the inspection itself.
What if the inspector asks an employee or supervisor for a written statement?
This is very similar to the approach with the request for an interview. With respect to the rank and file employees, they certainly will be asked to give a written statement and will have to give that. And there's no right for the labor counsel to review that before it's done. The employee can certainly ask for a copy of it once they give the statement. With respect to the supervisors and the managers, however, labor counsel has the right to request a review of that statement before it's turned in, and they should do so.
What about a request for employer documents?
Any request for employer documents should be reviewed by labor counsel first, even if the request is made to the rank and file employees as opposed to the supervisors. Labor counsel should review that request first, as well as the responsive documents, and then turn them over to the OSHA inspectors.
Is it appropriate for the employer to ask OSHA whether an employee has filed the complaint, and if so, who filed it?
Employers should not inquire into whether an employee has filed a complaint, and certainly not into the identity of that employee. First of all, employees have the right to make safety complaints if they feel that the workplace isn't safe. And second of all, OSHA is going to be very protective of that information because they want to encourage employees to come to them with concerns.
Finally, Lori, what should the employer do once the inspectors leave the premises?
Employers should consult with the small inspection team that monitored the inspectors on the walk-around. Make sure that they have any of the photos or video footage or any notes that the inspection team took, any comments that the inspectors made, any areas that were of particular concern, and discuss that with labor counsel. That way, if there's anything in the interim that the employer can do to address any safety violations, they can go ahead and fix those. Also, they should follow up with the inspector to see if they have any suggestions before any sort of formal citation might be issued. And finally, make sure that the employees, the rank and file employees, are aware that just because the OSHA inspectors were on site, that doesn't mean necessarily that there was a violation, and it certainly is not the time to begin any sort of dialogue, whether that be informally or through any email communications that might later be damaging to the employer.
That brings us to the end of this episode of StudioCF. We hope you found the discussion informative. Please take a moment to browse our other legal topics and be sure to check back with us each month for new episodes. Thank you for watching.